Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean Breathes Books. Welcome back to my channel and a very special presentation in conjunction with, but not in any way affiliated with, Jane Austen July. I have a panel of esteemed Janeites assembled here to hold forth on all things Jane Austen and bring me up to speed, as I enjoyed reading Jane Austen many years ago, especially under the tutelage of a wonderful professor, but more about her in a minute. Let's introduce the panel. We have a mother-daughter duo here, BookTube's own Roz of Scallydanding About the Books, and Tilly of Tilly's Shelf, joining us from their homes in the UK. And also Kathy James Cavan, who is joining us from her exotic home in Italy. And Kathy James Cavan was my professor in the early 90s, and I read a lot of Jane Austen with her because of her. And I want to brag on her behalf that she edited an edition of Sense and Sensibility back in the day, and I have my own copy that came out from Broadview Press. And we're here to talk about Jane Austen in general, Jane Austen July, and some other more specific areas of interest related there too. And I'm being a little bit verbose at the moment because you're not going to really hear another peep out of me because I'm just here to bring these people together. And in fact, I'm literally going to disappear off the screen for large parts. So what I'd like to do to get started is to have each of you introduce yourselves in greater depth. The animating question shall be, tell us about you and Jane Austen, including what is your favorite and why. Why don't we start in the reverse order? Kathy, why don't you get us started?
Okay. I am a retired professor of English. I had 30 wonderful years at the University of Saskatchewan, and I'm also a retired United Church minister, which is partly relevant to reading Jane Austen. She has a lot of clergy people in her novels, of course. And my first experience with Jane Austen actually wasn't through Jane Austen. I read a play written by Helen Jerome in the 1930s, and it was in my mother's high school English book. And I don't know, maybe at 12, 11, something like that, and reading my mom's textbooks from when she was a kid. And I read this wonderful play. I thought it was great fun. And then in my first year of university, we studied Pride and Prejudice. The play had been Pride and Prejudice, and I was shocked to discover that I knew the story. I knew this, I knew the characters, and I was just in love with Pride and Prejudice. And that's just the beginning, and I never stopped. I've been fascinated by Austen ever since. So that's how I came to my Austenatiousness. Austen. Anyway, and I think my favorite, it's always a toss-up. I often say Persuasion because I love the tone and the mood of Persuasion. It's shorter than all the rest, and that doesn't necessarily make it the best. I love the writing in that book. But lately I've been thinking Mansfield Park has so much going for it. And people don't like Mansfield Park. They don't like Fanny Price. But I think she's fascinating. And I'm thinking of getting more into Mansfield Park in the next couple of months, just digging right into it. So that's me.
Wonderful. Tilly, is now a good time or not a good time for you to introduce? And your microphone is off, but so I'm not sure what you're saying.
I just said now will do. And I feel I should probably explain that through a masterpiece of poor planning, I've wound up in sole responsibility of a 9-month-old baby, precisely at the time that we'd meticulously pre-booked to have this.
That sounds vaguely Austentinian in and of itself.
Somehow. And the thing that's currently keeping him entertained is rocking the chair that's got my laptop on it back and forth. Yeah, some sound and visual interference is happening.
No problem. That's all just adding to the allure of this call. In introducing yourself in the way that I invited you to, can you also say a bit about Jane Austen July?
Absolutely. So Jane Austen July is a month-long read-along, obviously in the month of July. It's hosted by Katie at Books and Things and Marissa at Blatantly Bookish. I think is it just the two of them this year?
And Claudia. Claudia has been stood up free.
In which we follow the same prompts every time. Read books by Jane Austen, about Jane Austen, from the time of Jane Austen. There's 6 prompts. I won't list them all. And it's something that I've been doing since I started on BookTube, and it's the way, crucially, that I hooked Roz and pulled her into BookTube, because I said, Roz, there's this great event called Jane Austen July, and there's a tag to go with it where you have to answer these questions that are like, oh, who's your favourite Jane Austen character? And we just had an absolutely fantastic time going through those questions. The character you love to hate, things like that. It was years ago now, and you don't see this tag around. How I started with Jane Austen, I think, was with Pride and Prejudice. And I know I must have been pretty young, because I know for sure that I'd read Pride and Prejudice before going to see the 2005 adaptation with Keira Knightley in the cinema. So obviously when it first came out, that came out in 2005. I was born in 1994. So that means I'd read Pride and Prejudice around age 11, which presumably I couldn't really understand a lot of it at that stage. But I was furious because the 2005 adaptation wasn't like true to the book. It not got right. Favorite Jane Austen book now? It's really interesting because, as Kathleen was saying, Mansfield Park is underappreciated among Jane Austen's novels. But when I was thinking, what am I going to say for this? It is the one that I get drawn back to. And I think it's because you have to work to love it. And once you've put the work in and like you've read it once and been like, oh, but that didn't go how I expected it to go. It's not very romantic. I don't really get it. But if you read it again and you start to see the depth there, you feel like you've earned your affection for Mansfield Park. So yeah, I was going to go for Mansfield Park as well.
Great, thank you. And Roz, let's go full circle with you, and including anything else you want to add about Jane Austen July, but specifically what maybe right at the end of your talk, what the group read is, because that'll lead us into part two discussion.
Brilliant. Yeah, where did I start with Jane Austen? Obviously, I don't
Didn't
have
you,
a real...
Didn't you go to school with her?
You cheeky thing, sure. I'm just a little bit younger than that. You do realise that it's her 250th anniversary.
I also realised that you and I are about the same age, so I don't know what the hell I'm...
Yeah. And I don't have a date to hang it on, it's 2005, but I know that, yes, I was similar to Tilly. I was around 11, 12 when I first read Pride and Prejudice, and Pride and Prejudice is the gateway drug for Jane Austen for most people, isn't it? And was totally sucked in and enamoured of that. And then in my teens read all the others, and hit Mansfield Park and did think, oh, this is a bit dreadful. When you're like 14, it's not the book that you want to read. When people say, what's your favourite Jane Austen? And since then I must have reread them multiple times. And then what a joy to have a daughter that wanted to read them and gave me a reason to reread them all, and then sucked me into BookTube through Jane Austen July. When you say, which is your favourite Jane Austen, my immediate answer is the one that I read most recently, because whichever I read, I think, oh, this is the best, I love this. Apart from Northanger Abbey, which has never been my favourite, although I think it has been Tilly's favourite at some point, maybe.
I love Northanger Abbey. It's such a sweet book, and yet there's also so much to it. But I could defend Northanger Abbey. You could make a case for all of them. I just think you underappreciate it.
But generally, and more seriously, I was laughing when you were talking, Kathy, because I think that I tend to say when pressed that Persuasion is my favourite. But just lately, I've been edging towards Mansfield Park instead. Yeah, but I think I'm going to land on the side of Persuasion. It's something about the slightly melancholic tone and then coming good that has spoken to me. But I love all of them, so as I think we probably all do. And yes, Jane Austen July, as Tilly was saying, has prompts to read one of the main novels, read one of her other works, lesser works, or the letters and other things by Jane Austen, to read something that's like an Austen adaptation, a modern version, or alternatively historical fiction set in her era. That's the one that I always struggle with a bit. Yeah. And then to read something by one of her contemporaries. And I'm thinking that later in this conversation, Tilly and I, we may be picking your brains a bit on that, Kathy, because you're the sort of 18th century literature expert, we know. But one of the other aspects of Jane Austen July is there's a group read. So this year's group read is Emma. And I'm really looking forward to revisiting Emma, because Emma's one of the books that, oh, yes, there's one. Look, there's another. Or I've got this one. Emma's one of the Jane Austen books that sometimes people are quite critical of. And I'd be interested in hearing your opinion of Emma, Kathy. I absolutely love it, but there are criticisms that get thrown at it, I think.
Yeah, Emma is my favorite. And
Oh.
I always get my back up when people say they don't like it because they don't like the titular protagonist. And I thought she was lovely, but maybe I'm saying more about myself than anything. But I am really excited that this is the group read this year. And so this will be my first year participating in Jane Austen July. And what better way to re-experience Emma? With that said, lovely people, have at it.
I'll just add, actually, interesting that it's your favourite. It's my husband's favourite of the Jane Austens that he's read, and he's experienced all of them as adaptations, but he's not read all of them. And interestingly, he loves Emma, but he hates Persuasion because he says nothing happens. And I would argue, honestly, that a lot less happens in terms of events. You know, Persuasion, somebody has a near-death experience.
But there's someone falling to her near death. That's
exactly,
a lot.
That's an event to me. But yeah, that always entertains me. But I think he finds Emma, the characters are compelling in a way that obviously appeals to him. So yeah, I'm looking forward to reading it again, as are we all.
I have to say that Emma is usually my least favorite. There's something about Emma herself that sets my teeth on edge. And you're meant to have your teeth set on edge, actually. But I do love the way it reverses the expectations at the end. Instead of Emma leaving to join up with her new husband, he comes to her and Mr. Woodhouse gets his way, which I think is just hilarious. So I like that part of it. And the Jane Fairfax plot, for me, it's bleak. And it's a wonderful contrast with Emma, who has everything in the world and everything to live for. So I enjoy that part of it. But there's so much that I think I just made uncomfortable, which is a good thing. I'm just uncomfortable with Emma. I don't really want to be near her.
In a way, it's a bit of a reverse, because Jane Fairfax is the character that you would expect to be
the main character. Yes.
Jane Fairfax is the character that you would expect to be the heroine in a story of this kind, as in she's poor, beautiful, exceptionally talented, hardworking, and she gets this kind of fantastic Cinderella story, like snatches it from the jaws of going off to be a governess in Ireland. And in many ways that's more compelling, but Jane Austen flips it and we get instead this difficult character who's a bit proud and keeps rubbing people the wrong way and just thinks the world of herself, but doesn't actually have a lot of application. But yeah, we still somehow love her. And I think I probably see some of myself in Emma, and that's why I quite like to see her have a happy ending.
Yeah.
Which is why, Tilly, you're my favorite of all of Ross's children.
But I really love Emma's kind of sparkiness and the way she keeps trying.
Yes.
She doesn't let things
Very
get
trying.
She messes up and is knocked out and then she bounces back again.
Yes. Yeah.
She's a very resilient character. And yes, she has loads of advantages, but that's not her fault.
She's got a really snarky brother-in-law. I don't like John Knightley very much at all. And that adds spice to the novel, for sure.
And also, the thing you have to say about Emma is that she lost her mother, then she loses her other significant sort of, I don't know, adult female. And she has
sister as well. I think it's worth saying she loses her sister. Her sister goes to live in London and she sees her 2 or 3 times a year, which somebody like Emma, who seems to really value close female friendships, seems to be quite a big.
Yeah, so it's not surprising that she hooks up. That's not quite the right way of saying it, but that she takes on the project of Miss Smith. It's not surprising in some ways.
Yeah. And the other thing that Emma is dealing with is her father. She is extraordinarily loving and tolerant of what is in some ways quite a difficult man.
Yes. Yeah, I wouldn't want him around. He sucks all the attention in the room into himself with very little payback. He just, it's all about his gruel and his habits, and he gives very little, it seems to me, in any social situation. And it's really interesting to me that he's the social center of Highbury, the only claim he has is status. So I love that part of it. It's quite an interesting comment, I think. Austen.
You do wonder if somehow he's earned that by how he was previously. Yeah, it's an odd situation, but then that's the beauty of Jane. She doesn't make things overly simple.
There's not much backstory. In fact, he is described as being a valetudinarian all his life. I think that's on the first page, which I love that. He's always been this way, right? Pedantic, preference, whatever. Yeah.
They have to have a theme with her father characters being set in their ways, I suppose, because you get the same with Mr. Bennet has always just, since his marriage, always just retreated to his library. And who's the other father that I'm thinking of? Oh, Sir Walter Elliot.
It's Walter Elliot, yes. There's a lot of connection between, I think, Sir Walter Elliot and Mr. Woodhouse, because they're both of them very self-centered, self-regarding characters. Yeah. Fathers too.
Appreciate their daughters.
That she kills off fathers as well. There's the two Dashwood father figures, right? The uncle and then the father, Dashwood, both died quickly. The Fanny Price's father is a scary fellow. Yeah.
I'm just going to get one comment in here before I disappear off the screen and just bask in all this brilliance. And the reason that don't have much to say is because I read and loved Jane Austen. How many years ago is the early 1990s? I don't even want to know how many years ago. It's a long time ago, so I don't remember the books very well. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited to be rereading Emma. But I just wanted to get in here that I have also purchased the audiobook narrated by Juliet Stevenson.
Oh.
Yes, so that's good.
Lovely, Juliet.
I will not just only be listening, I will be paging through the book as I listen, and that's my peak way of experiencing a literary text.
She's one of the personalities doing the BBC program as well, I understand. Is that right?
Yes, she is, yeah.
What BBC program is this?
The one that you can't see because you don't have a television, but...
I can't see it either, but I was reading about it.
I can reassure you two, though, possibly not Shawn, but you two, that it's a lovely programme so far, but it won't tell you anything that you two don't already know about Jane Austen.
What's the name of the programme? What's the title?
Jane Austen Genius or something like.
Oh, yes.
It's the BBC it's a 3-part documentary, and it goes into quite a lot of detail, but if you've read a biography or two, then you'll already know it. I'm sure you will. One of the things we were saying about difficult or absent fathers, or fathers very set in their ways, one of the things about Emma's father is his absolute obsession with his health, and we're never really sure whether he really has some real chronic health conditions or disability, or whether it's really all in his mind and an attention thing, as it were. I know that's something that you've written about, Kathy, is that right? So
yeah, I think we have to take him as a character with a disability, whether it's hypochondria or not. It's still his presentation is as a person with an illness. Hypochondria was an illness too. So whatever the genesis of his illness is, or his preoccupation with his health, that's how he functions in the novel. And that's what interests me, is how disability contributes to the text and what it says against the other things that the novel is saying as well. So what I found interesting specifically in the Emma situation is that as the patriarch, he's physically the weakest character. He doesn't engage in the events except for the Christmas party, which interestingly to me, I thought he would be the one to say, we shouldn't be going out in the cold and it's terrible and so on. But it's not him. It's John Knightley who says, why are we going to this party where we're going to talk about the things we talked about yesterday and they haven't changed and they won't be any different tomorrow? etc. And then he gets terrified of the snow, and he says it's snowing a tempest out there. We'll have to get into our carriages and get home right away. And the novel describes the snow as being perhaps half an inch, a little bit of a skiff of snow, really, we would say in Canada. But so I found that really quite curious. Mr. Woodhouse, one could read him as this sort of crumbling patriarch representing a crumbling patriarchy and supported by his daughter and the entire society. But really, John is the most, to my mind, the most reprehensible of the patriarchs. And he adopts the sick position from time to time to get his way and argue with Mr. Woodhouse. I haven't quite figured out all of the ins and outs there, but I'm very interested. That's what I'm interested in, is to see how disability is used to contribute to the novel, how the disabled characters contribute. And Austen personally had experience with people with disabilities. We all do. And she had a member of her family, her brother George, lived away from home. He was deaf. We think there's evidence that he didn't speak and that he may have had an intellectual disability, but we don't really, there's not much that's known about him, except in references to him are always, there's always an adjective. The adjective poor comes before his name. So he's always poor George. So she certainly experienced, and she had an uncle who had mental health issues, and also her nephew, no, it would be a cousin's child, died as quite a young man, as a 15-year-old. Disability was part of her life and part of her experience, and she makes fun of her own illnesses in her letters towards the end of her life, surprisingly enough. And I think she's quite interested in difference and diversity, the difference that disability makes in the characters. I have a theory. I look at her career as having sort of two parts. And the first, with Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility, my sense is that, and even with Mansfield Park as well, the novels drive the reader towards the completion and the acceptance of the heroine into the great house. That success is measured by Elizabeth Bennet and Pemberley. And things that contribute to that, disability can contribute to that. In fact, the cold that Jane gets is very important to that plot working itself out. And then later, I think that disability is turned against that plot structure of the great house and the heroine coming home and becoming the lady of the manor. That gets turned on its head in the last, especially in Persuasion. And disability there also plays an important role, but I think it plays a role in poking holes in the standard completion, the standard conclusions to novels, the happily ever after thing. Now, I'm not sure that I read, for example, Louise's fall from grace, that Louise's fall is necessarily a fortunate fall. It does teach her the seriousness that she didn't have before. But I wonder, she could have died so easily, and she was near death. And that seems an extreme way to teach a character a lesson. So that just leaps off the page to me as being over the top, and I'm curious about that. But yeah.
But then in a way, I feel that there's something about life's transience, that in a way, it's not all we must punish her for being a bit foolish by a disaster. It's like just being reminded that you're only ever one step away, particularly then, from death or a disabling injury, because that was the reality.
Yeah, we also get Fanny Harville dying, and that she dies just after she's finally married. Was it just after she finally married, or just before they finally?
No, she's engaged to Ben. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that Fanny Harville's death and Louisa's near death is, in a way, they're there to remind us, as Ros was saying about the transience, of the fact that Wentworth might not have had that second opportunity, and to stress the value of this chance that they have where they meet again.
Yeah.
So I guess
it's a carpe diem thing, isn't it? Seize the day, and how foolish it is to not grasp your chances of happiness.
Yeah, and there's also a reference that Wentworth makes to the fact that his ship nearly sank at one point, and he's casually, or we would have all just been another little note in the newspaper. You get this moment of Anne, I can't remember the exact wording, but she's effectively thinking, I nearly lost him and I didn't even know. And at that point, they're not yet reconciled, and she's just realizing,
That I think is in
just the fragility of their
Yeah.
chances at that time.
and that's in the narrative of I think, if I'm remembering correctly, the narrative of Don Musgrove's death. And there's some weird language around that, but it was clear that life at sea was not guaranteed.
Yeah.
It's difficult and precarious.
John Musgrove's death is interestingly portrayed because it's almost sold as being a good thing for the Musgroves that their wayward son.
It's comic. It's handled in a comic way, kind of. Mrs. Musgrove's fat sighings over the death of the son that nobody really cared about. Yeah.
I was thinking about Anne's friend, who's
Mrs.
the other sort of Mrs. Smith, disabled character that we meet.
Yes, Mrs. Smith's very important. Yeah.
And who's absolutely crucial, I think. She's such a positive character and role model for Anne, despite for dealing with her life's challenges. And what's interesting is, and again, I'll look to you, Kathy, to expand on that, but like very often in literature up to this point, disability is used almost like a metaphor for being bad, or there's an association between disability and potentially evil, or not necessarily big evil, but I can't think of the right word, but deviousness or meanness. There's often negative associations around it. And it feels like Austen doesn't use it in that way.
Yes, I agree with you. Yeah. And many of her characters with disabilities they're not marginalized. They're not just sort of a foot or a plot device. They contribute to the overall purpose of the text, the overall, in my view anyway, the critique that the novel provides includes the people with disabilities. And Mrs. Smith in Persuasion, I think, is a key character. And I think there's a recent film of Persuasion that leaves her out entirely, which to me means that they didn't really tell the story, at least not the story I know. But he plays that really central role of, in a way, she's an anti-Mr. Woodhouse. She's the center of all kinds of social knowledge and social power, really. And yet she is a completely marginalized figure. Is she widowed? She's lost her husband. She's widowed. She's disabled. She lives her life in these rooms, but she has contacts and she knows more about what's going on around than Anne does, who's actually in society. But I argue that Anne already knew that she wasn't going to marry Elliot, the Walter Elliot younger, before she found out what a scoundrel he was from Mrs. Smith. But she helps to secure that knowledge. And the author, I think, is securing that knowledge for the reader as well, beyond Anne's preferences. Yeah, she's a really important figure, I think.
Thinking about Mrs. Smith in the context of what you said earlier, which is something that I'd never thought of before, about the first set of narratives being about the heroine moving into the great house, and Persuasion in a way being this narrative of her leaving the great house. I feel like in some ways Mrs. Smith is a role model for Anne of the fact that there is a life outside of, along with the Harvilles, I would say as well, but the world doesn't have to be Kellinchall and Bath, but there is happiness even in a situation that people wouldn't think of as happy at the time, in terms of small lodgings, limited means, disability. Like she shows to Anne that actually there are options out there. You don't have to be in this space.
I agree. Yeah. And the Crofts provide that. Mrs. Croft provides another one of those examples too. Her life at sea.
And this the amazing freedom that Mrs. Croft has.
Yeah.
Just joining her husband, just being kind of part of his life and experience, the adventures that she has. I love Mrs. Croft as a character. Interesting what you said earlier, Kathy, about people with disabilities aren't necessarily marginalized, because one of the things that struck me when I was thinking prior to this discussion is they are often disbelieved, or the text kind of throws doubt on what they said. Thinking about Mrs. Bennet, for instance, she constantly talks about her nerves, and she obviously does have, like, her lived experience is one of quite a lot of potentially quite justified anxiety, and like she needs a lot of reassurance and support, but we're encouraged to be dismissive of that. And similarly in Emma, we've got Frank Churchill's adoptive mother, so I think that's he's actually his aunt, Mrs. Churchill, and he's constantly saying that she's ill, and nobody really believes that she's as ill as she's making out, and then she does die. No, but we've got this kind of sense that people's health isn't necessarily believed to be what they say it is, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah, my take on that is that Austen is playing with hypochondria, which was common, while the 21st century response is to say, it's all in your head, get over it. It is actually an illness. Hypochondria is seen as an illness that people could have to live with during that time period. And yet, I think Mrs. Bennet's nerves are played for fun and laughter. But you're right, at the same time, her life trying to find places for 5 daughters is not easy. And she's getting nothing from her husband, who's, he doesn't think that this is a problem, except that it is. And she probably didn't have a lot of resources, personal inner resources. They married because she was very pretty, according to the novel.
Yeah.
So a woman without a lot of depth put in a difficult situation. So I think I laugh at my poor nerves speeches, but I think that we need to take a step back too, as you mentioned. But also, she is experiencing that. She is experiencing that anxiety. And I think dismissing the anxiety, we play into Mr. Bennet's hands in that way. We become Mr. Bennet's.
I'm really sorry, but I'm gonna have to go because I need to do food and bedtime. I'm really sorry that I messed up on timings and organisation on this. But I've really enjoyed the discussion so far, and I hope to see what you continue to discuss later on in the finished video.
I'm really glad you were able to join us for this time. It was lovely to meet you.
I think we're pretty.
I wish I'd managed to organise myself a little bit better.
But I want your vote before you go, Tilly. I think we should make this an annual discussion.
I'd be up for that. Absolutely, yeah. With a different book to start from. I think we could just keep going for a very long time, really.
Nobody needs to sign a contract, but that's the feeling I've got. So
yes, because there's a whole swathes of books that we haven't even mentioned. So there's loads to.
We haven't talked about Watson's or Sanditon yet.
I know Sanditon when we're talking about disability, absolutely. But yeah, really nice to chat with all of you. Thank you very much for having you, and thank you, Shawn, for hosting.
So I'm wondering if we could do a little coda, as it were. I was really hoping to pick your brains a bit, Kathy, as someone who's taught 18th and 19th, the long 18th century, is that what you call it, literature?
Yeah.
Because every year for Jane Austen July, there's always a prompt to read one work by one of her contemporaries. And I think that is the prompt that people find most difficult to find something that works for them, or they end up with just a handful of more predictable choices. And actually, I think there's quite a depth and selection that people could turn to. And it would be brilliant to get a few recommendations. And just to say, they don't have to be exactly in her lifetime. It could be an 18th century writer that might have stopped writing before Jane was born, but is someone that she will have read and that will have been an influence on her, or someone who's writing just after her, because it's all about just people getting seeing Austen in a literary context.
There's an unfortunate tendency, I think, to see Jane Austen as being this sort of bright spark that came out of nowhere, this naturally able writer and brilliant, and but she was formed by influences like all readers and writers are. Yeah, so I've been thinking about this, and Austen was herself a huge fan of Frances Burney, the novels of Frances Burney. When Burney's first novel, Evelina, came out in 1778, and when Frances Burney was working on Camilla, her second novel, she published through subscription. That is, that she shopped it around and got people to order the book beforehand. And Jane Austen was one of them. And her copy of Camilla is actually in Duke Humphrey's library in the Bodleian at Oxford. And she makes a note in it about how awful Dr. Marchmont is in that. Anyway, so I would highly recommend anything by Frances Burney. Evelina, the first of Frances Burney's novels. Camilla was a big favorite of Jane Austen, but it's a lot longer than Evelina.
Yeah. Evelina's the one that I've read. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was, yes, looked more doable.
Yes, yeah. Another author to try out is Elizabeth Inchbald, A Simple Story, written towards the end of the 18th century. Also, it involves a young woman making her way in the world, dealing with patriarchs around her. And I think that would make an interesting contrast with Mr. Woodhouse and the relationship between Emma and Mr. Woodhouse. I would recommend as well anything by Mary Wollstonecraft. I think that Austen was influenced by Wollstonecraft's ideas. I would not guarantee that she read Maria or The Wrongs of Women. Probably she did not, but it would be an interesting book to read alongside an Austen book as well. And of course, Maria Edgeworth was another favorite of Jane Austen. And I like Belinda. I think the novel Belinda makes a really good contrast with Austen's writing. It's a lot more picaresque and it's a lot of fun. But it also engages the reader in some serious questions. So that's another possibility.
Yeah. And my limited experience of reading Maria Edgeworth is that she's very readable. You don't, like sometimes when you read things, you can feel a bit like, oh, I can see why they enjoyed this at the time, but I feel a bit distanced from it, whereas I didn't reading her. Yeah. I'm interested with the Elizabeth Inchbald suggestion because I read her play. No, she wrote many, of course, but the Mansfield Park connection.
Yes.
So that's an interesting recommendation. One that I was wondering about reading and would love to know whether you think it's any good is The Female Quixote, Charlotte Lennox, which I've heard
Charlotte
about.
Lennox, yeah. Yeah, that's another one I was thinking of as well. Yes, it's much earlier. That one is 1978, and it is part of the Quixote cult, I guess. It's a response to the Quixote style of novels, of poetry, etc. But what I love about it is it's a take on that, but from a female perspective. The main figure is a writer herself. She believes herself to be in a book. The ending is can be controversial depending on how you see the main character, how you understand what she's been doing throughout the novel. And it's well written. I think it's a good, it's a good read. Yeah. She is kind of Emma in that she's the author of her own text. But the problem is she doesn't fit in.
Right.
Very well.
Sounds interesting. I know one of the obvious things that people might choose to do would be to go down the sort of Gothic line. Any particular recommendation? Only because if you read Northanger Abbey, you're very conscious of the kind of text that she's making fun of there, and then it's tempting to go and actually read one.
Yes, you really should. In fact, you should just take that list of horrid novels that are right in the novel and go through, see what you can find. A lot of them have been reproduced, and I think a lot of them are available online too. Through the Chawton House Library, they have some things as well. But I think you have to read The Mysteries of Udolpho if you want to read Northanger Abbey and get the jokes and get some of the jokes. That for sure. But I would read any Radcliffe. I love Radcliffe, the Italian, anyway, and Mistress of Udolpho for sure.
For sure. Yeah. That gives people a few to pick from.
But I wouldn't say you need to read a Gothic novel to get Emma.
No.
It might be too great a stretch.
No. Yeah.
But they're fun.
Yeah. And one of the entertaining bits in Emma is the way she makes lists of the improving reading that she's going to do.
Yes.
I think that's one of your habits, Shawn, isn't it? Making lists of all the improving books that you're eventually going to read.
One day, especially the ones on procrastination, I'll get to eventually.
That's it.
Speaking of improving, I feel like just eavesdropping on this incredible conversation has improved me considerably, and I hope we will reconvene next year, if not before, above whatever literary topic. It's so lovely to bring the people in my literary universe together. This was a smashing success, and I'm really excited about Jane Austen July, and I hope that the people watching this that didn't know about it will take part as well. And I'd like to thank Kathy and Roz and Tilly, who had to leave a bit early, for such a rousing discussion.
My pleasure.
Thank you for bringing us together, Shawn.
Brilliant idea.